guys this little over here. Gold in public, central bank notes in public. Notice how they keep saying in public, in the people first. Now when we say public, we also mean businesses too, okay? And then demand deposits of the commercial bank. Now the demand deposits will be by the public households, by businesses, or even by the government. If the government keeps a demand deposit at the commercial bank account, because the government's going to spend that money sooner or later. Now, when there is no gold, money supply reduces to something very simple. Banknotes and demand deposits. I will now shorten demand deposit, just write it as DD, okay? So, the banknotes I can also shorten as cash plus DD. That's the next sentence, again, page 132. Let's see. Alright, well, then the next sentence is very clear. That's at the one. Again, it's the same story that we started early on. Under central banking, money supply depends on the people's willingness to hold gold. If you choose to hold gold, this means you're not holding a deposit. This means that the central bank cannot expand the money supply with banknotes. And therefore, commercial banks cannot. So, central banking is limited by people's demand and preference to hold gold. That's the case in India. Second, central banking and commercial banking is limited by the people's demand for cash. If people demand cash and don't use the banking system doesn't work. It can't profit. It can't profiteer. Okay? So, you can limit as consumers, as people, you can limit the commercial banking system by simply not using it. You don't borrow money from them, and you don't put your money in them, and that limits their expansion. Because, as we study later on, that increasing the money supply, which we call credit expansion, eventually causes a boom and a bust. In other words, it has a devastating effect on the economy. We call this the business cycle. So the people's response to defend themselves from the business cycle is simply not to use the bank in the first place. All right. Now, if you have a central bank, what's the question? Let's see. Question? All right. Next thing is commercial banks can easily go bankrupt. That's fairly straightforward. What's very important to understand that usually a central bank can go bankrupt too. All right. So, what are the central bank? Central bank will have assets and liability. All right. So, what is the asset of a central bank? Yes, correct. The assets of the central bank are the reserves. Correct. Now, what is the reserve? What reserve will a central bank hold? Gold. They'll hold gold. And what is the liability of the central bank? Banknotes. Banknotes. So, central bank will hold banknotes. All right. So, the central bank now will have a reserve ratio. Reserve ratio. Let me write it nice and clean and clear for you. Central bank reserve ratio. is reserves, which is gold, to banknotes. Banknotes. Okay. This is the amount of paper money which they issue. Remember, monopoly of money and monopoly of banknotes. The central bank can essentially print as much as they want. And the answer is not really. If the central bank gets to print too much, people will take the banknote, give it to the central bank, and exchange it for gold. Okay. So the central bank must maintain a fairly high reserve ratio. It must maintain 50%. In other words, yeah, they have twice more banknotes than gold, but they just hope that half the people will not walk to the bank and get their gold. Sometimes they can maintain only 25%, but usually practice shows that a central bank must maintain anywhere between 25 and 50%, like 40% of reserves. Now, if you have a central bank reserve ratio, this means that you'll have a multiplier too. Multiplier. You'll have a multiplier. If you take the gold out, the central bank must shrink the banknotes. Now, the banknotes are reserves for commercial banks. Okay? So, okay, I'll do this little trick. I'll use the same reserve ratio of 20%. Okay? And we'll have a multiplier of 5. This means the following. If there is, let's say, 1 unit of gold, 1 ounce of gold, which is $20, on top of those $20, the central bank can create how many banknotes? 100. And now the commercial banking has $100 of banknotes. They can create how much money supply or deposits? They can load up $100 of reserves to become 500. So you got a multiplier at the central bank, and then you got separately a multiplier at the commercial banks. And I'll just stop here, give you 10 minutes, and then I'll continue with the next remarkably important stuff, because I don't have, 5 minutes to explain. It takes about 10, 20 minutes to explain. So, you get